Very different. I've come to many of these meetings, and it's very different being on that side of the podium. But it's a privilege to be here and to speak with you guys tonight. I apologize up front if you were expecting the real Marcus Luttrell or Mark Wahlberg. Unfortunately, you just got me. When Jay first approached me about speaking to you guys this evening, I began to pray about the topic. The thing that came to mind almost immediately was the 2013 movie Lone Survivor. I've always found this movie inspiring. I've seen it many times. It depicts the real-life events which occurred in Afghanistan in June of 2005, when a Navy SEAL named Marcus Luttrell, played by Mark Wahlberg in the movie, and a four-man SEAL team set out to kill or capture the Taliban leader MOSJ. Early in their mission, the team is faced with a pretty substantial moral dilemma. Their position is compromised by three random shepherds that stumble upon them in the mountains above the village. And they basically have three choices. Do they kill them? Do they leave them? Or do they let them go? And in the end, they do the right thing. They let them go, knowing full well that they'll probably betray them to the Taliban, which of course they do. And for the rest of the film, the SEALs doggedly fight for their lives. They endure heroically against overwhelming odds. They escape, they evade, they counterattack. All of them are shot multiple times until three of the SEALs are killed. And in the end, Marcus Luttrell is saved by a generous Afghani family. Sorry if I just ruined the movie for you, but in fairness, you had 12 years to watch it. And it's called Lone Survivor, so you know that somebody makes it in the end, right? So maybe I don't need to apologize after all. In the opening sequence of the movie, we hear the voice of Marcus Luttrell. There's a storm inside of us. I've heard many team guys speak of this. A burning, a river, a drive. An unrelenting desire to push yourself harder and farther than anyone could think possible. Pushing yourself into those cold, dark corners where the bad things live, where the bad things fight. We wanted that fight at the highest volume. A loud fight. The loudest, coldest, darkest, most unpleasant of the unpleasant fights. I probably don't have to tell any of you that the Navy SEALs are among the best of the best in our nation's military. They're the toughest, smartest, strongest, best-trained Special Forces operators in the entire world. They're able to go farther, shoot straighter, fight harder, endure longer than most of us can probably imagine. How did they get that way? I would suggest two things. The first is determination. No one gets to be a Navy SEAL with a casual interest or a half-hearted desire. The selection process that's called BUDS is just too brutal and extreme. We get a glimpse of that process in the opening sequence of the film. It's a systematic, non-stop effort to tax you physically and mentally, very intentionally designed to get you to quit. If your mind and your will are not absolutely determined to make it through, you're simply not going to make it. Every Navy SEAL has made a decision to never quit. They made a decision to be the best. They made a decision to be SEALs. Every Navy SEAL is determined to let nothing stand in their way. The SEALs in Lone Survivor really take a beating. As I said, all of them are shot multiple times. There's one sequence in the film where they're pushed back to the edge of a cliff by this overwhelming force. And that's the only direction out. And they jump off a cliff. And the remarkable thing is that after banging off rocks and trees for what seems like an absolute agonizing eternity, they do something unfathomable. They get up and they go on. They just keep getting up. They keep grabbing their weapons and fighting on again and again and again. That is determination. In addition to determination, the SEALs also have training, a lot of training. Not just to become a Navy SEAL, but to stay razor sharp, to always be in peak physical and mental condition, to continue tactical training, weapons training, all kinds of different training. It's been said that under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. And so Navy SEALs are never content to be the best of the best, always training to get better. Now, I think that saints have a lot in common with SEALs. In fact, I would argue that the saints are the Navy SEALs of the Catholic Church. They're the best of the best. They're the special forces of the Lord, if you will. And here's the thing. You and I are called to be saints. Not necessarily canonized saints, but saints nonetheless. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by the French novelist Léon Blois, who once wrote, "The only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint." Heaven is our goal. Heaven is the only thing that really matters. And the only humans in heaven are saints. And so it follows very logically that if heaven is our goal, and we need to be saints to get there, then there is nothing in this world more important than being a saint. A saint is quite simply someone who lives a life of heroic virtue in relationship with and in likeness to Jesus Christ, in and through the sacramental life of his bride, the church. From the very first moment I started to watch this movie, I started to consider, what can we learn from Navy SEALs about being saints? And I'm going to suggest to you that the same two things that make a SEAL also make a saint. Like SEALs, the saints had a radical determination. Like SEALs, saints made a decision to never quit. They made a decision to be saints. There's a great story about St. Thomas Aquinas' sister who approached her brother one day and said, "What must I do to become a saint?" To which he famously replied, "Will it." Or if he had lived today, he probably would have said, "Just do it." The saints made a decision to be holy. They made a decision to cooperate with God's grace, to be free of sin, and to be full of virtue. They were determined to let nothing stand in their way. And the saints also had training, a lot of training, not just to be good people or good Christians, but to be heroic in the practice of their faith. Just like the SEALs, the saints were never content. They were always trying to get better. St. Teresa of Avila has one of my favorite descriptions of the importance of determination in being a saint. She says, "Do not stop on the road, but like the strong, fight even to death in the search. For you are not here for any other reason than to fight. You must always proceed with this determination to die rather than fail to reach the end of the journey." It sounds as much like Jocko Willink or David Goggins as Teresa of Avila, but it's St. Teresa of Avila. We need to make a decision, a determined, ironclad decision to be saints and let nothing stand in our way. We need to do everything in our power to be holy, to cooperate with God's grace, and to grow day by day into the saint whom He has created us to be. No one becomes a Navy SEAL with a casual interest or a half-hearted desire. Being a SEAL has to be their number one priority, without question. without that resolve, that determination, that irrevocable decision, no one becomes a Navy SEAL. No one becomes a saint with a casual interest or a half-hearted desire. Being a saint has to be their number one priority without question. Without that resolve, that determination, that irrevocable decision, no one becomes a saint. In the quote we saw earlier, Marcus Luttrell was talking about Navy SEALs, but his words apply equally to us, I think. That is, if we're determined to be the saints whom God's created us to be. He said that there is a storm inside of us. That storm signals conflict between the lesser interests of our lives, the baser interests of our nature, and the greatness to which we are called. We're called for greatness. We're called to holiness. We're created by God for God. We know that there's something more in our lives than this. We know it, or we wouldn't be here. I think we know that burning, that river, that drive that Marcus Luttrell was talking about, that unrelenting desire to push yourself harder and farther than anyone could think possible. We know that we're not there yet. We know that we still have work to do. We know that holiness doesn't come cheap. We know that being a saint is going to cost us something. We know that we need to push ourselves into those cold, dark corners of our hearts and lives, where the bad things live, where the bad things fight, our habitual faults and failings, our well-worn patterns of sin, places where we've become comfortable, complacent. I think we know that this is going to be a high-volume fight, a loud fight. We know that our weaknesses, our shortcomings, aren't going to go away quietly. We know it, don't we? But have we decided to do something about it? Are we determined to do something about it? Have we sort of begun to be saints? Or are we determined to be saints? If we sort of want to be saints, it's just not going to happen. It's not enough for us to be good people. We need to make a decision to be holy, to be a saint, and let nothing stand in the way of that goal. No habit, no sin, no Netflix series or video game, no project at work, no sporting event, no relationship, no pastime, nothing. Nothing can stand in our way. I think a great model for determination for those of us who want to be part of the spiritual special forces is someone who let nothing stand in the way of his goals, either temporal or spiritual. The soldier saint Ignatius of Loyola. St. Ignatius was born in 16th century Spain. He was a very good soldier, but vanity and pride and worldly ambition and sin had distracted him from what was most important in life, from being a saint. In a battle outside Pamplona, he was hit in the leg by a cannonball. Now, that's a bad day. Next time you're having a bad day, just say, well, I didn't get hit in the leg with a cannonball. By some miracle, it didn't take his leg off, but he was maimed. The injury threatened not only his military career, but also his looks. This is back in the day where manly men wore like pantyhose, and their legs were like a lead feature in their attractiveness. So if he had this Gamby leg, the ladies wouldn't be as attracted to him. So he needed to get the leg fixed, obviously. And as he convalesced, the only books he could find were the Gospels and the lives of the saints, neither of which he was remotely interested in reading. But he eventually got bored enough that he broke down and he read them. They proved to be the catalyst of his conversion. Those books prompted him to ask himself a question which would change his life. And I think it has the power to change our lives as well. What if I were to do what St. Francis and St. Dominic did? In other words, what if I were determined to put Jesus Christ at the center of my life? What if I were to pray like a saint? What if I were to fast like a saint, to do penance like a saint, to live and to work like a saint? He became determined to answer that question. And you know what happened? He became a saint. And what's more, what happened to us if we too are determined to do what the saints did? Stands to reason that we too, by God's grace, will become saints. And so I think the first thing that seals and saints have in common is that neither one could have gotten where they were without this kind of determination. But once we have that determination, once we've made up our minds that the only real sadness, the only real failure, the only great tragedy in life is not to become a saint, and have made being a saint our number one priority, we're going to need training. Now, obviously, the training of a saint is going to look quite a bit different from the training that a Navy SEAL undergoes. But the adage that under pressure you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training, I think is as true in the spiritual life as it is in the temporal life. So if we want to be saints, we need to be training like saints. Now, I'm an acronym guy. I think that acronyms are a great way to remember things that might otherwise be forgotten. So I'm going to use an acronym to hopefully help us to remember our training program. The word that I'm going to use is scram, because we're working towards sanctity, and that's precisely what we make the devil do when we're working toward holiness. We make him beat feet and scram. Plus, the letters just worked. So the first part of any spiritual program has to be the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession. First of all, we obviously need food to survive. Even Navy SEALs have to eat and stay hydrated in order to function. And we cannot hope to be saints without proper spiritual nourishment. This is why the lives of the saints were centered on the Holy Eucharist, the body and blood, soul and divinity of Jesus Christ, whom we receive at Holy Mass. That is the food and drink that makes us grow in holiness. And so we need to make the Mass the cornerstone of our lives. And Sunday Mass is the minimum. Navy SEALs and saints aren't about doing the minimum. They're both about going above and beyond. What are we willing to do? What are we willing to sacrifice to adjust our schedules in order to get to daily Mass at least once or twice a week, or more than that if we're already going once or twice? What are we willing to do to make time at least weekly to adore our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament? So too with confession. No matter how firm our resolve, at times we're going to falter, we're going to fail. We should never give in to discouragement, because we have a God who is merciful. We have a God who longs to pick us up and to heal us when we fall. In the final line of the movie, we hear Marcus Luttrell say, no matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how hard you fall, you are never out of the fight. We engage in spiritual combat each and every day. And that is a line I think we need to keep at the forefront of our minds and our hearts. You and I are never out of the fight. We are never out of the fight because the sacrament of confession is a sacrament of healing, designed to get us back on our feet and back in the fight, back on the path to holiness and sanctity. Regular sacramental confession should be a regular part of our training, at least once a month. The saints almost always went more than that. Now, as much as you and I are most likely inspired by the story of the heroic deeds of the Navy SEALs and lone survivor, and I hope more importantly, the stories of the heroic deeds of the saints, their deep prayer life, their superhuman penances, the amazing work that they did to bring souls to Christ. The fact of the matter is this: you and I may never be called to do great deeds. I know that sounds like a downer. But here's the thing. We might not be called to do great deeds for God, but we are still called to be great saints. St. John Berchmans was a 17th century Jesuit who died at the age of 22. The hallmark of his very short life is the ideal that ordinary deeds done extraordinarily well will lead to great holiness. That's our path to sanctity. It might seem like a bit drab and boring at first, but in reality, ordinary deeds done extraordinarily well, it's not only the most reliable route to holiness, it's also the most heroic route to holiness. The relentless, daily grind, the slow, creeping martyrdom of ordinary life, lived extraordinarily well. And in this life of ordinary holiness, we have very good company. Jesus Christ himself, especially in his hidden life. Think of the long, slow unfolding of those unremarkable 30 years. The weary life of a village artisan in first century Palestine. Sore feet, sore hands, sore everything. Every day. Thankless work, a spare diet, day after day after day. In our own lifelong succession of 1,000 thankless tasks, we keep our Lord company. And when we concentrate our effort with a razor-sharp focus at the task at hand, whatever it may be, not only do we accompany our blessed Lord, but we serve him with love. The dreadfully boring report that we're working on, doing it as well as we can, offering it with love to the Lord as a prayer, dealing as patiently as we can with that really aggravating coworker, offering it with love to the Lord as a prayer, not giving our opinion, not trying to win an argument, even when we know we're right. Keeping custody of our eyes, keeping custody of our ears, giving whatever we're doing, whomever is before us, our undivided attention. Doing whatever we're doing as if for the Lord, because it is. Seeing whoever is before us as if they were the Lord himself, because they are. And doing it day in and day out. That is what it means to do common things uncommonly well. That is our mission. That, as St. Ignatius would say, is how we distinguish ourselves in the service of God our Lord. I think we all know and appreciate the power of the Most Holy Rosary, so I'm not going to belabor this point. I'll simply say this. Our Lady is the most powerful intercessor in the universe, who is better equipped than anyone to help us to get to heaven. She is our Queen and she is our mother. And in every approved Marian apparition, from Guadalupe to Akita, she has begged us to pray the rosary daily. If all that is not enough to convince us to step up our game with the Most Holy Rosary, I don't know what will. I could talk for days on the rosary, but I think you guys would like to go home at some point. So I'll simply say, pray the rosary well, pray the rosary daily. Now, the battle for our salvation is not a defensive war. We do have to defend ourselves against the assaults of the enemy, of course. But like Navy SEALs, we don't live our lives in a defensive crouch. We also need to take the fight to the enemy. In this regard, St. Ignatius of Loyola used the phrase agere contra, or act against. The spiritual life is a war, a campaign, a lifelong struggle against the world, the flesh, and the devil. But St. Ignatius reminds us that wars are fought one engagement at a time. This is why he advises us to act against our inclinations, our whims, our desires, of course, our temptations to sin. While fasting, prudently and prayerfully observed, will always be in good regulation, there's often a temptation for us as men especially to push the envelope, to try and take on more extreme penances. And at times I think it can become more out of vanity and pride than the desire to take up our cross and follow the Lord. But we're always on firm footing when we're acting against our inclinations in the hidden and anonymous circumstances of our daily lives. Think about not putting butter or jam on your toast in the morning, not putting cream or sugar in your coffee, sitting in prayerful silence in the long commute on the way to work, not taking a second helping at dinner, not resting your back against the chair. Sorry, everyone's doing that. No judgment here, no judgment. Limiting our social media consumption, limiting our time that we spend watching YouTube or sports or news. We should always apply this logic to what's traditionally known as our predominant fault, prayerfully discerning the sin that we struggle with most, and consciously cultivating the virtue that opposes that vice, very carefully tracking our progress or lack of progress as well. For example, if we have a bad temper or we struggle with impatience, I know that's nobody here. It's definitely me, though. We can consciously work to practice the virtue of meekness. Meekness is the virtue in which we submit our strength, our will, to the one who described himself as being meek and humble of heart. To update the analogy that Francisco de Osuna used, the virtue of meekness is like bubble wrap that surrounds glassware in shipping, preventing it from being broken when it's banged around in transit. When we're meek like our Lord, we're not impacted as much by the blows to our ego when they come. We can maintain our peace in those trying moments, mindful of who we are and whose we are, and imitate him who, though he was harshly treated, was silent and opened not his mouth. Acting against our whims, our tastes, our preferences, and acting against our predominant fault by cultivating the opposing virtue is an important part of our training regime as spiritual SEALs. And the last part of our program is meditation. Teresa of Avila once wrote that meditation is the basis for acquiring all of the virtues, and to undertake it is a matter of life and death for all Christians. I think it'd be tough to put that more strongly, how important meditation is. It's a matter of life and death. A quote like that from a doctor of the church should really get our attention. But if that's not enough of a convincer, here's another one by another doctor of the church, St. Alphonsus Liguori. He says, by experience, we see that many persons who recite a great number of vocal prayers, the office or the rosary, fall into sin and continue to live in sin. But he who attends to meditation scarcely ever falls into sin. And should he have the misfortune of falling into it, he will hardly continue to live in so miserable a state. He will either give up meditation or renounce sin. Meditation and sin cannot stand together. However abandoned a soul may be, if he perseveres in meditation, God will bring him to salvation. Taken together, those are two pretty powerful arguments for us to be meditating every single day. We simply cannot be saints without it. We could spend all night talking about methods of meditation. We obviously don't have all night. But I think it's important to say that any method of meditation, however useful, is a guide. It's a means to an end. And the end goal of meditation is the raising of our mind and heart to God, a conversation with God. If you feel like you could use a little help in getting going or going deeper in the practice of meditation, I have two suggestions. I hardly ever finish a talk without recommending at least one book. Here's two. Conversation with God by Peter Thomas Rohrbach and Time for God by Father Jacques Philippe. You can read anything by Father Jacques Philippe and you will definitely be edified. Father Chad Ripperger, with whom I think many of us are familiar, says that we need to meditate for at least 15 minutes a day just to satisfy the minimum requirements of justice, what we owe to God. So 15 minutes, he would say, is... Obviously, as we've said, seals and saints are not about doing the minimum. St. Pio of Pietrelcina advised his spiritual directees to take 2 30-minute periods of meditation daily, so an hour total. An hour of meditation every day is in keeping with what the spiritual tradition and the saints have typically advised for those who want to make real progress in the spiritual life. Certainly that's going to cost us something. Most probably sleep, for starters. It will require us to reorder our priorities, to curtail other things we want to do. But no one gets to be a seal without sacrifice. No one gets to be a saint without sacrifice, without determination. Now, before anyone panics, I'm not saying that we jump right into an hour immediately. Depending on where we are right now, it might not be advisable. And we certainly don't want to neglect our families or our duties. We're not monks. We're not meant to be. Francis de Sales would be horrified if he thought I was encouraging you to act like monks. It's not what I'm saying. But can we move in this direction? If we aren't meditating daily, can we carve out 15 minutes for a quiet conversation with God? If we already meditate for 15 minutes, can we make it 30? And so on. And a good spiritual director is invaluable here. And with anything that I've said tonight, I would always submit it to the care of a good spiritual director. There's a storm inside of us, a burning, a river, a drive, an unrelenting desire to push yourself harder and farther than anyone could think possible. Just like the seals, I think St. Ignatius and all the saints felt that. Do we feel it? Are we willing to ask ourselves the question that lit a fire under St. Ignatius? What if I were to do what St. Francis and St. Dominic and St. Ignatius did? And then, can we be determined to do it? If we're going to be men of faith who not only survive but thrive in a world that is so hostile to the faith and to the faithful, we need to be determined to be saints, to train like saints, to fight like saints. That means making holiness our number one priority. It means taking a cold, hard look at our priorities, at our schedules, and making the tough but critical changes we need to make in our lives. Rest assured that will not be easy. But no one said that being either a seal or a saint would be. To be a saint means to push ourselves into those cold, dark corners of our lives where the bad things live, where the bad things fight. We have to be ready for that fight, determined to persevere, to never quit, to get up one more time than we fall by the strength that comes from God and God alone. Knowing that with Jesus Christ on one side and Our Lady on the other, no matter how much it hurts, how dark it gets, or how hard we fall, we are never, never out of the fight. God bless you guys.